Undercover boss orders breakfast at his own restaurant, freezes when waitress complains about tips. She thought he was just another tired traveler, but one brave whisper about missing tips uncovered a web of lies and changed everything. Would you have dared to speak up? The early winter rain drizzled against the car window, each droplet smearing across the glass like the turmoil clouding Michael Carter's mind, the 50-year-old CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group. He sat quietly in an old pickup truck he'd rented that morning, staring through the fogged windshield at the flickering neon sign of Sunrise Diner Branch 28. 30 years of building an empire from humble food stands. And yet, Michael never imagined the day would come when he'd have to go undercover, hiding his stature as a hospitality magnate, returning to a place where everything seemed to be slipping beyond his control. A low-brimmed cap, an unkempt beard grown meticulously over weeks, a faded plaid shirt, and worn-out jeans. He was the perfect image of a weary man searching for warmth after a long, exhausting road. On paper, Branch 28 was still turning a steady profit. The district manager, Stan, delivered reports polished to perfection. But beyond those gleaming numbers, Michael knew something was rotting beneath the surface. The employee turnover rate was triple the average. Customer reviews spoke coldly of poor service, and a heavy, oppressive atmosphere hung over the place, something no spreadsheet could capture. Taking a deep breath, Michael pushed open the door. The familiar chime above the frame rang out like a knife cutting through the golden memories of a once glorious era. Inside, warmth radiated from the kitchen. The sweet aroma of fresh pastries and coffee filled the air, but it wasn't the smell that caught Michael's attention. It was the eyes, avoidant, tired, and drained of life. A young woman approached, her dark circles barely concealed under a thin layer of makeup. Her name tag read Cassie. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" she asked, her voice flat and emotionless. Michael chose a quiet corner near the barista counter, a vantage point where he could observe everything unnoticed. He ordered a simple meal and settled in silently. Cassie worked like a machine, while two male servers leaned lazily against the counter, chatting away. She handled nearly a dozen tables on her own. Her steps were swift, her hands fluidly carrying trays, while sneaking in quick coffee refills for other guests. Efficiency radiated from every motion, but beneath it all, those fragile shoulders bore a weight no one seemed to notice. Michael's brow furrowed as he noticed something odd. Whenever a customer paid by card, those two male servers would immediately step in, polite but unmistakably deliberate, taking over the payment process before Cassie could reach it. A while later, as Cassie brought his coffee, Michael cleared his throat, his voice low and rough from practice. "You're working real hard, miss. Must be raking in good tips, huh?" Cassie paused. A flicker of guarded caution flashed in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a weary smile. Her voice dropped to a whisper, just loud enough for Michael to hear. "Some things, no matter how hard you work, they just don't come your way, sir." Before Michael could ask another question, Cassie had already slipped away to another table, as if afraid she might accidentally reveal too much. But that one vague response was all he needed to confirm his suspicions. Here at Sunrise Diner Branch 28, there were unspoken rules no report would ever show. And today, he wasn't just here for breakfast. Michael Carter gently rotated the coffee cup in his hands, his gaze seemingly wandering casually around the diner. But behind the thick lenses of his reading glasses and the shadow of his worn cap, his eyes were sharply recording every detail. 40 years in the restaurant industry hadn't aged him much, but it had honed his instincts to catch things most people overlooked. By the coffee station, Ryan and Jason, two young men in crisp uniforms, stood chatting and laughing, their carefree voices echoing even as dirty tables sat unattended. Each of them had only a handful of tables to manage, yet neither seemed in any hurry. Meanwhile, Cassie, the one who had caught Michael's attention that morning, was practically sprinting around the diner. Her arms precariously balanced 3 or 4 plates, while her free hand skillfully poured steaming coffee for other guests. Michael narrowed his eyes, noticing something odd. Every time a customer paid by card, Ryan or Jason would appear instantly in control, almost snatching the POS terminal out of reach. Sometimes Cassie was still mid-conversation with a guest, but when it came time to settle the bill, it was always one of the two young men handling the transaction. Everything happened seamlessly, as if this routine was second nature. Resting his elbow on the table, Michael lowered his voice when Cassie passed by again. "Cassie?" he called softly. She stopped, barely catching her breath after another exhausting round of service. "Got a moment? Just wanted to ask something about this place. My daughter's looking for work, and you seem so hardworking. I was wondering, is this a good place to start?" Cassie offered a faint smile, but her weary eyes betrayed a flicker of hesitation. She glanced nervously toward the coffee counter, where Ryan and Jason were half-heartedly pretending to wipe surfaces. Their eyes locked on her and Michael. "I'm not sure this is the right place for someone new, sir," she whispered, her fingers absently tracing the corner of her order pad as if pretending to jot something down. "Things aren't always what they seem here. Unless you're part of the inner circle, it's hard to get ahead." Michael raised his brows, feigning confusion. "Inner circle?" Cassie bit her lip, hesitating before murmuring so softly it was barely more than a breath. "People like Ryan and Jason, they always handle the POS, they collect all the credit card tips. People like me, no matter how hard we work, only get a cut of the cash tips, and well, you know, hardly anyone carries cash these days." Her eyes drifted toward Doug, the manager, who stood comfortably at the counter, occasionally casting careful glances in their direction. "But I really shouldn't be saying more. I hope you understand, sir," Cassie said quickly, before hurrying off, not leaving room for any further explanation. Michael leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a tight line. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and what they revealed was deeply unsettling. This wasn't just favoritism. It was a deliberate, calculated system that preyed on both the trust and the fear of employees like Cassie. He clenched the cold coffee cup in his hand. "Well played, Doug," Michael thought, his eyes narrowing into a steely glare. "You started this game, now let's see who finishes it." Outside, heavy rain lashed against the tall glass windows of the 15th floor office at Lakeside Hotel, where Michael Carter, CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group, stood motionless, staring out into the storm. His hands gripped a now cold coffee cup, his gaze lost in the endless sheet of white rain. The wind howled past the windows like a storm building inside him, ever since his visit to Branch 28. Behind him, the internal investigation team had gathered. Mara Jenkins, head of investigations, along with two assistants, sat silently, eyes locked on the computer screen. Numbers flashed relentlessly, each line of data hitting like a punch to the pride of a man who'd spent 3 decades building his company on integrity. "Would you like to see the full report, Mr. Carter?" Mara asked, her voice calm but tinged with worry. Michael turned, his eyes sharp and commanding. "Start it. I want to see everything with my own eyes." Mara moved her fingers across the keyboard. On the large screen, a detailed breakdown appeared, each figure as sharp as a blade, cutting into every principle of honesty Michael had worked so hard to uphold. Doug Henderson created a hidden classification in the POS system called Auxiliary Server, Mara began. This designation flags certain employees as secondary support, meaning they're not officially recognized as primary servers in the system. As a result, all digital tips, whether through credit cards or loyalty cards, are excluded from their payouts. Michael leaned heavily on the table, his breath thick and heavy. His mind flashed back to Cassie, the exhausted young woman with dark circles under her eyes, carefully avoiding surveillance, and that haunting unfinished warning. "Here, some people always get the share, and people like us." "And who exactly are these favored ones?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse with restrained anger. Luis, a member of the investigation team, pulled up another data set. Doug's nephew, Ryan Henderson, has received over 67% of all FEOS distributed tips in the past 3 months. The remaining balance is shared among 3 other employees, all part of Doug's inner circle. Cassie and 7 other staff members haven't had access to digital transactions at all. $18,000, Mara continued grimly, pulling up a pie chart that highlighted the missing funds. To be exact, $18,742.63 just in the last quarter. This money was funneled through a shell company Doug established, Henderson Hospitality Consulting. The company has no legitimate business operations but regularly receives consulting fees directly from the system Doug manages. Michael clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning in the conference room. There was no doubt left. This wasn't just weak management. It was a calculated, organized, and ruthless system of fraud. His most loyal employees had been exploited and suppressed, all under the guise of internal policies. Mara pulled up another data set. "And it doesn't stop there, Mr. Carter," she said gravely. "We've discovered that Doug is preparing to sell Branch 28 to a private equity firm, Nexus Capital, at 25% below market value. All the paperwork is ready, just waiting for your signature, which you weren't even aware of." Michael's voice was low, seething with anger. "Because he knows I would never sign off on a deal that sells out our people." "Exactly," Maura nodded solemnly. "He's not just greedy, sir. He's playing a long game." Michael walked slowly toward the window, his eyes tracing the rain droplets clinging to the glass. A storm of emotions swirled within him. When did it all start slipping away? When did the values he'd held above all else, fairness, respect for workers, become forgotten beneath the cold excuse of efficient management? How many like Cassie had bitten their tongues, enduring silent injustice simply because they didn't have the courage or the choice to speak up? "Prepare everything," Michael said, his voice low but resolute. "Tomorrow, we turn the board on this game." And in that moment, his eyes burned with a fire long forgotten by those opportunists under his command. The fire of a founder, ready to protect what he'd built at all costs. Not just a business empire, but the dignity and fairness owed to the people who quietly made that success possible. Michael sat in silence in the Lakeside Hotel's dimly lit conference room, the soft glow of the computer screen reflecting against the time-worn lines on his face. At 50, he'd seen every light and shadow the restaurant industry had to offer. But what he uncovered this morning weighed heavier on his heart than anything before. The report still lay open before him. That final figure, $17,842.63, printed plainly on the last page, felt like a blade plunged deep into the pride he'd carried all his life. Nearly $18,000 siphoned directly from exhausted workers like Cassie in just one quarter. Michael leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, and in that still moment, the memories he'd buried for years came crashing back like a dam breaking. He was just 25 years old then, still young night shift manager at a tiny family diner called Mel's Diner on the outskirts of Chicago. The place was cramped, the furniture worn and creaky, but to the struggling workers in that neighborhood, it was the only place where the light stayed on through the night. He remembered it vividly. June, the oldest server at the diner. Her silver hair was always neatly tied back and her hands were rough and cracked from 3 decades of scrubbing dishes. Her wages were meager, yet she never complained. She simply smiled and said, "You know, as long as the customers keep smiling and the coffee stays warm, I feel warm too." But then, on a bitterly cold winter night, Michael discovered the harsh truth that the very supervisor he once respected had been quietly pocketing the majority of the tips painstakingly earned by staff like June. When Michael confronted him, the man merely smirked. "Don't be naive, Mike. A handful of loose change isn't going to change anyone's life." The next day, Michael walked away from that job without a word of farewell. But the image of June, huddled by the small heater, sipping cheap coffee, her distant eyes staring out a fogged-up window, that image haunted him for decades. And now, within the very corporation he'd spent half his life building, history was repeating itself. Cassie, her eyes, those tired yet quietly hopeful eyes, were the same as June's all those years ago. worn down but not broken, just asking for one simple thing: fairness. Michael exhaled slowly, his eyes opening with a sharp clarity. "Not this time," he vowed. "No one will have to choose between their last meal and their dignity. Not while I'm still here." He reached for the phone and dialed Mara Jenkins, head of internal investigations. His voice was low but unwavering. "Mara, get everything ready. It's time we claim back what belongs to Cassie and to all the forgotten people like June." This time, he wouldn't walk away. He would stand his ground and fight. The rain that morning came down in heavy sheets, but Michael Carter, CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group, felt an unusual calm settle over him. He'd faced multi-million-dollar negotiations and weathered crises that threatened to sink his entire career. But this was different. This was personal. It touched a place no balance sheet or business strategy had ever reached: his sense of honor. Disguised once more as Walt Simmons, with a faded cap and a worn-out denim jacket, Michael stepped back into Sunrise Diner Branch 28, a ghost in plain sight. Everything was exactly as it had been. Cassie rushing between nearly a dozen tables, Ryan and Jason loafing by the coffee counter, wearing those smug half-cocked grins as if the world existed solely for their convenience. Michael deliberately chose the same table in the corner, hidden enough to stay unnoticed, close enough to hear every conversation not meant for outsiders. He quietly ordered pancakes and a coffee. When Ryan came to handle the payment, Michael pulled out the special gift card, one meticulously set up by the investigation team the day before. This wasn't just a payment method, it was a trap, designed to trace exactly where the digital tips were flowing within the system. And one more thing, Michael pulled out a crisp $50 0-cent bill, placed it on the tray, and deliberately raised his voice just enough for Ryan and a few nearby employees to hear. "Exceptional service deserves to be rewarded," he said smoothly. Ryan blinked, a slow, sly smile curling at the corner of his mouth. "We truly appreciate generous guests like you, sir," he replied with a low bow. But his eyes, those eyes held no gratitude, only cunning satisfaction. Moments later, Michael's phone buzzed with a message from the tech team. $50 0-cent tip transferred directly to Ryan Henderson's account. No record of it credited to Cassie. Doug and Ryan's scheme ran like a well-oiled machine, as if it had played out 100 times before. The money that should have rewarded the sweat and hard work of people like Cassie flowed straight into the pockets of those who merely stood by and watched others struggle. That afternoon, inside an emergency meeting room at a nearby hotel, Michael sat before a wall of surveillance screens. On the feeds, Ryan and Doug had no idea their every move had been fully recorded. The smirks exchanged near the cash drawers, the furtive glances as they split cash during breaks, and the hidden commands inputted into the POS system. Commands they thought no one would ever audit. "We have more than enough evidence," Mara Jenkins, head of internal investigations, confirmed. "Just say the word, and we'll hand this over to legal immediately." Michael's hands clenched tightly around his coffee cup. His mind flashed back 25 years, to when he was just a young manager. Back then, a supervisor had cheated his team out of their bonuses. Michael had no voice, no authority, only a deep, lingering bitterness that stayed with him for years. And now, standing at this same crossroads, he realized, if he chose to end this quietly, people like Cassie would keep suffering in silence, just as he had back then. Michael stood, his eyes burning with resolve. "No," he declared firmly, "I won't let this end behind closed doors. Tomorrow morning, during peak hours, in front of every employee and customer, I want to end this with my own hands. And I want everyone to witness firsthand that justice isn't just a word written on policy papers." Mira nodded, a faint smile of approval crossing her face. "Finale worthy of Sunrise's history, Mr. Carter." Michael turned to the window, his gaze lingering on the last raindrops clinging to the ledge. An old chapter was about to close, and with it, a new dawn would rise, one where fairness was finally restored. The next morning, before the sun fully broke through the clouds, Michael Carter left the hotel. The sky was still shrouded in the pale gray light of a day on the verge of rain, but inside him there wasn't a single cloud of hesitation. Today, he wasn't the polished CEO gracing the covers of business magazines. Today, he returned as the man he once was, a simple, middle-aged worker who had once fought to survive, just like the day he started his first business selling hot sandwiches from a street cart on the cold sidewalks of Chicago. Outside Sunrise Diner Branch 28, a light rain began to fall, washing away the thin layer of dust that had dulled the faded neon sign. Michael adjusted his worn baseball hat, his cold, sharp eyes scanning the familiar glass windows, the same spot where, just days ago, he'd heard Cassie, the young woman with tired yet resilient eyes, whisper that heartbreaking confession about the stolen tips. But this time, he hadn't returned just to observe. He was here to set the final trap. He took his usual seat, the corner table, with a perfect view of the payment counter. From across the room, he spotted Ryan. Even at a distance, it was clear the young man was running the show. Ryan's eyes swept across the room with brazen arrogance, wearing his entitlement like a crown. When Cassie passed by, Michael stopped her with a soft smile. "Ms.," he said gently, "how about something special for breakfast today? And maybe give me the chance to properly thank the fine staff here." Cassie hesitated, her eyes flickering away. I'm not assigned to this section today, sir. Mr. Ryan will be serving you directly," she murmured. Michael gave a slight nod, his expression calm, though beneath the lenses his eyes burned with quiet fury. Everything was falling exactly into place. Ryan strutted over, his smug half-smile in full display. He took the order and, at Michael's request for early payment, performed a practiced flourish with the POS machine right at the table. "And add a tip to my bill, $50.00, Michael said slowly, his eyes boring into Ryan. "A token of appreciation for the excellent service around here, young man." Ryan hesitated for a beat, but then the familiar, cocky grin returned, the grin of a spoiled heir who always got his way. "Very generous of you, sir," he said smoothly, fingers flying over the POS terminal. But Michael didn't miss the sly glint in his eyes, the one that revealed everything he needed to know. Minutes later, as he walked out of the diner, Michael pulled out a tablet directly linked to the data system his investigation team had prepared. The screen lit up, and there it was, clear as day. $50.00 tip transferred straight to Ryan Henderson's account. No distribution recorded to any other staff. Michael stood silently in the light drizzle, as if letting the rain wash away any lingering doubt. This wasn't just a battle over numbers. This was a fight for Cassie, for all the silent believers who had once placed their faith in him, back when he was just another nameless server in a forgotten corner of the world. A vivid image of his father surfaced in his mind, that proud man who once stood silently as his small family shop was swallowed by a corporate giant, simply because he couldn't make a loan payment in time. That memory was carved deep into Michael's very being, a constant reminder. Some things, if you don't stand up and fight for them, will be buried forever. And this time, he wouldn't back down. "It's time to end this," Michael muttered quietly to himself, his hand tightening around the folder filled with irrefutable evidence, his gaze locked onto the diner ahead. By this time tomorrow, a storm of truth would sweep through this place, tearing down the curtain of lies and deceit. Friday morning, the atmosphere inside Sunrise Diner Branch 28 felt as heavy as the looming gray clouds of late autumn. Everything seemed to operate as usual, but none of the employees knew that in just a few minutes, a real storm was about to hit. 855A. Three black SUVs pulled up directly in front of the entrance. The glass windows trembled as the car doors swung open. Michael Carter, no longer in disguise, stepped out in a sharp charcoal suit, a silver-gray tie, swaying gently with his steady, purposeful steps. His eyes were as cold as a frozen lake in winter, but beneath that icy surface, a fire burned fiercely. Right behind him walked Mara Jenkins, head of internal investigations, along with two members of the legal team. One by one, they entered the diner, striding in like judges prepared to deliver a long-overdue verdict. Staff and customers fell into stunned silence at the sight of Michael. No one could react fast enough, except for Doug Henderson, the manager, who stumbled out of his office, his face pale as if all the blood had drained from it. And there was Ryan, his nephew, standing frozen at the payment counter, his eyes darting frantically as if already looking for an escape route. Michael walked directly to the center of the restaurant. He didn't need a microphone. His deep, calm voice echoed through the space, every word cutting through the air like a blade. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Carter, CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group. Today, I'm not here for breakfast. I'm here to return justice to the people who truly deserve it." A wave of hushed whispers rippled through the room. Doug tried to recover his composure, stepping forward, his mouth opening as if to say something. But Michael raised his hand with a sharp, commanding gesture. "That's enough, Doug," he said firmly. "Today, I'll be the one speaking." He turned to face the staff, his eyes lingering when they met Cassie's, wide, overwhelmed, and brimming with barely held back tears. In just the past 3 months, nearly $18,000 in tips. Money that rightfully belonged to you. The people who worked tirelessly from dawn till late night was stolen through a sophisticated scheme using the POS system and the membership program. The people standing here, Doug and his nephew Ryan, created a secondary classification system to reroute and pocket your hard-earned tips directly into their own accounts. Michael turned and took the tablet Mara handed him. On the screen was the live transaction history, highlighting the exact $50.00 tip he'd left just 2 days prior. "See this?" Michael held the tablet high for all to witness. "This is living proof. I personally left a $50.00 tip, and it never made it to Cassie, the person who served me. Instead, it went straight into the account of Ryan Henderson." Doug roared, his voice hoarse with desperation. "You have no right to do this. This is how we encourage healthy competition among staff." Michael suppressed a cold smile. "You call this encouraging competition? I call it organized fraud." His eyes locked onto Doug's, sharp and cutting like a steel blade. "Doug Henderson, as of this very moment, you are officially terminated. And not just terminated, you will face legal consequences for your actions. Ryan Henderson, you're no exception." With a simple gesture from Michael, 2 plainclothes security officers stepped forward, seizing Doug and Ryan as the entire restaurant looked on in stunned silence. Cassie stood frozen, her lips trembling. And then she broke. Years of silent endurance, of swallowing back pain and injustice, came rushing out as she sobbed uncontrollably. Michael walked over to her, gently resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. His voice was calm but resolute. "Starting today, Cassie, you and people like you will have a direct hand in managing fairness here. A new POS system will be installed, and all tip transactions will be made fully transparent." Cassie cried and laughed all at once, the overwhelming flood of emotion breaking through. She had never imagined that one day, the CEO of an entire corporate empire would personally show up, listen to her, and stand up for justice on her behalf. Customers across the restaurant stood and broke into loud applause. The entire space seemed to light up, not just from the soft morning sunlight breaking through the windows, but from the warmth of a justice finally served. Michael took a deep breath and turned toward the employees. "From today on, Sunrise Diner Branch 28 will be run the way it was always meant to be, with respect, fairness, and compassion." He lifted his chin, his eyes flashing like tempered steel, his voice echoing through every corner of the restaurant. "Because trust isn't built on pretty reports, it's built on fairness for the people who create miracles every single day." No one spoke another word. That day, every meal served was on the house. But the greatest gift everyone received wasn't a free breakfast. It was the simple, powerful return of hope and trust. And outside, despite the soft drizzle still falling over Sunrise Diner Branch 2028, inside, a new day had truly begun. At exactly 8:45 a.m., 3 black SUVs glided silently into the parking lot like storm birds foretelling a coming tempest. Through the tinted windows, the silhouette of a man slowly emerged, his tailored charcoal gray suit immaculate, his tall frame upright and commanding, his silver-streaked hair a crown of undeniable authority. Michael Carter, CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group, had officially revealed himself. No longer was he the quiet man tucked into a corner booth under the shadow of a worn baseball cap. With him came the company's internal compliance and legal division, their arms full of thick files, their eyes sharp and unwavering. Pinned to their lapels were name tags bearing the unmistakable weight of authority. Internal compliance and legal division. The wind chime above the door let out a brittle, sharp ring. As Michael pushed it open, his eyes swept across the entire room like a razor's edge. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze in place. Cassie stood motionless, still holding a steaming coffee pot, her wide eyes unable to believe that the quiet customer from just days ago was this very man. Doug and Ryan emerged from the back office, their faces drained of color as though they'd seen a ghost. Doug forced a weak smile, attempting to salvage the moment with an outstretched handshake. But Michael stood tall and cold, flipping open a thick folder right in front of him. Doug Henderson, Ryan Henderson, Michael began, his voice deep and unwavering, each word striking the air like a hammer blow. Are you aware that in our current POS system, the highest tip-earning accounts don't belong to the hard-working servers on this floor, but rather to the man standing smugly at the coffee counter, occasionally chatting with customers? Before Doug or Ryan could respond, Michael gave a sharp nod to Mara Jenkins, head of investigations. She immediately brought up the electronic transaction records on a large mobile display wheeled into the room. Now, every employee and customer in the diner wasn't just a witness, they had become living proof. With each click of Mara's mouse, the data cut deeper, exposing the final remnants of Doug and Ryan's crumbling dignity. The number blazed across the screen: $18,742.63. The amount of tip money siphoned away in the last quarter alone. A collective gasp filled the room. And that's not all, Michael continued, his voice low but booming with authority. We've also discovered that your private company, Henderson Consulting LLC, has been receiving regular consulting fees quietly withdrawn from our very own Sunrise sales system. Where exactly did that money go, Doug? And why is it that every time those withdrawals happened, the tip payouts mysteriously fell short? Doug stumbled back, his face pale and drenched in sweat. I can explain, he stammered. Explain? Michael stepped forward, closing the space between them, his gaze piercing through Doug's feeble defenses. Explain how our surveillance footage clearly shows Ryan handling every digital transaction himself, while employees like Cassie, who've been shouldering nearly half the customer load here, haven't received a single cent from digital tips. Every eye in the room turned toward Cassie. She still stood there, her eyes brimming with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming emotion. Michael paused, slowly removed his glasses, and met the gaze of every single employee in the room. Today, I'm not just here to expose a fraud, Michael declared, his voice steady and commanding. I'm here to prove that justice exists, and it begins right here, right now. He turned to Doug and Ryan, his tone final and absolute. Doug Henderson and Ryan Henderson, as of this moment, you are officially terminated from Sunrise Restaurant Group. All fraudulent activities will be handed over to the authorities. I've already signed the lawsuit filings. Security, please escort them out. The crowd erupted. A collective sigh of relief filled the air, followed by scattered applause that quickly swelled into a standing ovation. Cassie dropped the coffee pot, covering her face with trembling hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. For the first time in years of back-breaking work and silent injustice, someone had stood up and fought for people like her. Michael stepped forward, gently placing his hand on Cassie's shoulder. Kiersey Taylor, I owe you my thanks. You had the courage to speak when no one else dared. And today, I am officially appointing you as interim manager of Branch 28, effective immediately. You will receive full benefits and a salary to match. Now, show me what happens when good people are given a chance to lead. Cassie choked back her sobs, unable to find words. For the first time, she didn't have to lower her head as a manager passed by. For the first time, she stood tall in the center of the restaurant, surrounded by thunderous applause. And for the first time, justice wasn't just a distant dream. It was standing right there with her. Michael Carter quietly exited the restaurant, leaving behind a room still ringing with applause. Above him, the sky began to clear. The rain had stopped, and the storm of justice had just swept through Sunrise Diner Branch 28, leaving behind a brand new beginning. 1 month later, it had been exactly 1 month since that fateful morning. Sunrise Diner Branch 28 now stood under a new light, not just from the freshly painted signage outside, but from the air of hope and pride within. Cassie, the once exhausted server with dark circles and heavy footsteps, now stood tall and confident, wearing a crisp new uniform. On her chest, her name tag gleamed. Branch manager Cassie Taylor. Her eyes no longer held exhaustion, but radiated confidence and pride, something she never dared to dream of before. On the day she officially took over as manager, the entire staff stood and applauded her promotion. With the fair compensation personally approved by Michael Carter, CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group, Cassie was finally able to complete her college education. In just a few short months, the accounting degree she had long dreamed of would become a reality. The new tip distribution system, designed by Cassie and her team, became a model for fairness. A digital display in the corner of the diner now openly showed the daily tip totals, visible for all employees to see. No more averted eyes, no more hushed, fearful whispers. Instead, the diner was filled with bright, genuine laughter behind the counters and heartfelt thank yous exchanged between shifts. Michael Carter returned to Branch 28 on a quiet, windless afternoon. He chose his familiar seat, the same corner table where his journey had begun under the simple guise of just another customer. When Cassie approached and placed a familiar cup of black coffee before him, their eyes met. It was no longer a glance filled with hidden meaning, but a knowing nod between two people who understood. The good they had waited for had finally arrived. "You know, Mr. Carter," Cassie said softly, her eyes shimmering under the warm glow of the late afternoon sun, "sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen to change the entire life of someone who once felt invisible." Michael looked at Cassie, the young woman who had once sacrificed her own dreams just to survive through endless shifts. And in that moment, he understood she was the very example of what he had long been searching for in the service industry: kindness, resilience, and unwavering courage. As he left Branch 28, Michael didn't return straight to corporate headquarters. Instead, he set out again, continuing his unannounced visits to other branches. This time, he wasn't just searching for flawless financial reports. He was looking for places where laughter had been replaced by weary sighs, for hidden corners where trust had been sold off to greed. Because he understood now, a restaurant empire isn't built from beautiful balance sheets. It's built by the people behind the counters, by those who quietly craft each golden pancake and brew every fragrant cup of morning coffee. And in his heart, Michael Carter repeated the words that had become his life's most important lesson: trust, dignity, and courage. These are the 3 essential ingredients in any restaurant, even if they're never listed on the menu. And that, Michael knew deep down, is also the recipe for a meaningful life.